Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Welcome back to Spanish Classes with Professor Jason. Now in today's lesson, I'd like to talk about how to use the tense that we sometimes call the past subjunctive or the imperfect subjunctive. Now this is kind of an advanced topic, so it might be a good idea to go back and review my videos on the present subjunctive before you watch this one, okay? I'm going to talk mostly about how to come up with the forms or to conjugate verbs in the past subjunctive, but this lesson is also going to include a quick review of the kinds of expressions and the sentence or syntactic constructions that will require or trigger the subjunctive, okay? Okay, and this is extremely important to remember. Every time that we want to conjugate a verb in the past or imperfect subjunctive, we have to begin with a third person plural form of the preterite indicative, right? They did something. Now, let's show some examples here on this slide that you can see with regular AR, ER, and IR verbs. So we have forms like hablaron, cantaron, or for ER verbs, comieron or corrieron. For IR verbs, we have examples like abrieron or vivieron. All right? What we're going to do next to get to the correct past subjunctive form is to remove the ON and to add the endings that we can see on the next slide. So on this slide, you can see that to the first person singular, yo, you would add the ending a. So we've taken off the ON from hablaron, and we're going to add a. Hablara or comiera, abriera, okay? For the second person familiar, the to form, the ending is as. That would give us, once we've taken off the ON from hablaron, comieron, abrieron, etc., we're going to get hablaras, comieras, abrieras. For the second person formal, usted, or the third person forms, él, ella, Juan, José, Ana, etc., we're back to adding a. Hablara, comiera, abriera. For the nosotros or nosotras forms, we add amos. Habláramos, comiéramos, abriéramos. Okay, we've taken off the ON again. For vosotros or vosotras, we're adding ais. Hablarais, comierais, abrierais. And for the third person plural forms or the second person formal, ustedes, we're going to add an. Hablaran, comieran, abrieran. A couple things to draw your attention to on this slide. Notice that when you say these forms, hablara, hablaras, hablarais, hablaran, you stress the second to last syllable, even though there's no written accent, okay? Except in the case of the nosotros or nosotras forms, when you stress the third to last syllable, habláramos, comiéramos, abriéramos. Notice in that case, in the nosotros, nosotras form, we have a written accent for that third to last syllable that we're stressing. Okay, so we've just established that every time that we want to conjugate in the past or imperfect subjunctive, we have to go back to the third person plural of the present indicative. Or excuse me, the preterite indicative. Third person plural of the preterite, okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind is that as we can see from this slide, there are numerous irregulars in the preterite tense, and especially among high frequency verbs, those verbs that we say all the time tend to be irregular in the preterite. So on this slide, what I'm showing are third person plural conjugations in the preterite tense of some very common verbs, and then just as an example, what the past subjunctive would be of that same verb in the yo position, in the first person singular position, yo. So for example, dar in the third person plural of the preterite is dieron. That would be diera in the past subjunctive. Estar, to pick out another example, is estuvieron in the third person plural of the preterite, which would be estuviera. Again, we're just taking off the ON and adding those endings that we saw in the previous slide. Ser and ir, which have the same form in the same conjugation in the preterite, third person plural would be fueron, and that's going to give us fuera in the subjunctive, the past subjunctive. Querer, for example, quisieron in the preterite, third person plural, would give us quisiera, quisiera. Tener, another extremely common verb that gets used, tuvieron, tuviera, tuvieron, tuviera. Okay, and finally, venir, I'm skipping a few here, but venir is vinieron in the third person plural of the preterite, and viniera in the yo form of the past subjunctive. Okay, so again, same formula. Start with a third person plural of the preterite. These just happen to be irregulars. Take off the on and add those endings that we have on the previous slide. Okay, now let's go on and talk about the uses of the past subjunctive in Spanish. I think the best way to really understand the past subjunctive and to use it correctly is to have a clearer understanding of when to use the present subjunctive or the subjunctive mood in general. And this is because the conditions and syntactic structures that will trigger the subjunctive in the present will also trigger the subjunctive in the past. The main difference, and this gets a little confusing, but I'm about to show examples, the main difference is that when the verb in the main clause is in the past tense, we have to use the past subjunctive in the dependent clause. Okay? Now I think the clearest way to model this and to explain it is to convert a few present subjunctive sentences into examples in which we need to use the past subjunctive. Okay? So what I'm going to do is take some examples from the present subjunctive and sort of change those over into past subjunctive cases. All right, so here we go. All right, we're going to start with this example here that's in the present subjunctive. And what we see here in this sentence, Julia quiere que Miguel compre el anillo, is the classic syntactic structure of the subjunctive, where we have a subject, right, a first subject, then a verb, then the word que here, then a second subject, and a second verb, and that's the one that's going to be in the subjunctive. Okay, so this is our syntactic structure that will trigger the subjunctive. We have a main clause, subject and verb, the word que, and then what we call a dependent or a subordinate clause after the word que. Okay, now the verb we want to look at to determine whether or not we need the subjunctive is this first verb here. Okay, the meaning, the sense of that verb is going to tell us whether or not we need the subjunctive. So again, just to review, what we see here is a sentence with a main clause and a dependent clause, which will feature a verb. Okay, this dependent clause will have a verb in the subjunctive if the verb here in the main clause communicates an idea related to persuasion or influence, want, hope, to need, to insist, to prohibit, to recommend, etc., doubt, uncertainty, or denial, or some kind of an emotional or subjective judgment such as happiness, fear, surprise, like or dislike, etc. In short, just about any idea other than an objective assertion that what comes next is true, real, or typical. So, the verb in the main clause is key in determining whether the verb in the dependent or second clause needs to be conjugated in the subjunctive mood. Now you're going to see how this is true in the rest of the examples we're going to convert. Okay, so let's come back to this original example that we have here. Julia quiere que Miguel compre el anillo. Now we have that in the present subjunctive. So what I'm saying is, what's going to happen if we were talking about the past and instead of quiere it was Julia quería, we're using the imperfect, the past tense, Julia quería in the past, que Miguel, what's going to happen with this verb here? Well, remember, it's going to be in the past subjunctive. We're going to go, to form that, we're going to go to the third person plural of the preterite, right, as we just saw a couple slides ago. Take off that on. Since we're talking about the third person subject position, Miguel, we're just going to add a. So it's going to be comprara. Julia quería que Miguel comprara el anillo. Okay? Julia quería que Miguel comprara el anillo. So we're going to see more sentences with this particular structure, right? Main clause, subject, verb, que, subordinate or dependent clause, subject, verb, with ideas that trigger the subjunctive. All right. So let me erase this one here, and we'll go through a couple more examples like that, converting them to the past subjunctive. Okay. Be patient with me here. So work with the whiteboard. All right. Another example might be something like Julio. Julio espera, hopes. Julio espera que, so there's our main clause. We'll put the second clause on the second line. Que su equipo, his team, gane, present subjunctive, el partido. Julio wants his team to win the game. Julio espera que su equipo gane el partido. Okay. I'll put up another example really quickly here. Let's see. Mi madre insiste en que, there's our que, en que lleguemos, insiste en que lleguemos antes de las 11. Running out of room here. One more. This one will use an impersonal expression. Es imposible. Remember, we're putting these in the present tense for now. Es imposible que vayamos, present subjunctive, que vayamos hoy. Es imposible que vayamos hoy. And again, what we're going to do is convert the verb in the main clause, right? The verbs in the main clause to the past tense, okay? In most cases, in many cases, it's going to end up being in the imperfect, okay? So instead of Julio espera, he hopes, we're going to say he hoped. Julio, I'm going to write kind of small here, esperaba, Julio esperaba, and I do have videos on the preterite and imperfect past tenses in Spanish. Julio esperaba que su equipo, something's going to have to change here with this subordinate clause verb in the present subjunctive. It's going to have to go into the past subjunctive. Ganara. Remember, we're getting that from the form ganaron, third person plural, the preterite, taking off the on, adding the ending. Okay. Mi madre used to always insist instead of insists. So mi madre insistía, imperfect form, en que nosotros, instead of lleguemos, this one's going to become llegáramos. Llegáramos, okay? Llegaron minus the O end, adding the amos. Llegáramos, written accent. Antes de las 11. And here instead of es imposible, I'm going to change it to it was impossible. Era imposible. And instead of that we go, I'm going to change it for us to go. Era imposible que fuéramos. Remember, that's coming from the base form of fueron, the third person plural, the preterite of ir. Okay, so Julio esperaba que su equipo ganara. Mi madre insistía en que llegáramos antes de las 11. Era imposible que fuéramos. A couple more examples of these. I'm going to show you an example that uses the idea of doubt. This thing's getting hard to erase. Okay, you can bear with me as I erase here. Hopefully the whiteboard technique is useful. I use it a lot in my regular classes. Okay. I doubt you have enough money. Dudo que tengas. Right here we have a main clause and a subordinate clause already. Dudo que tengas el dinero suficiente. Suficiente. I'm a horrible speller in English, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever. Suficiente. Dudo que tengas el dinero suficiente. This verb here communicating doubt or uncertainty. And then one that communicates sort of a subjective or emotional judgment. Me gusta. Text message. Me gusta que vengas a visitarme. I like when you come to visit, or I like that you come to visit me. So, again, we have main clause, que, subordinate clause, right, in a case that requires a subjunctive. So, we're going to take these verbs and put them in a past tense. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the imperfect. Okay, dudaba, I doubted. And here it's going to be me gustaba, I used to like. Okay, que tengas is going to change to, remember, tener is one of the irregulars, right? Third person plural, the preterite is tuvieron. So, dudaba que tuvieras is what the form is going to end up being, tuvieras. And instead of me gusta que vengas, we're going to have, again, this one is also irregular. The third person plural is vinieron. I'm going to get rid of that on, and in the to form I'm going to add the s. Vinieras. Okay? Me gustaba que vinieras a visitarme. Okay? Okay, so that's how we would convert sentences using the present subjunctive to the past subjunctive. 2 steps. We really have to change the main clause verb to a past tense and then convert that dependent clause verb to the imperfect or past subjunctive. Now, let's see if you can do this on your own. I'm going to give you 5 sentences that use the present subjunctive. See if you can convert these into examples of the past subjunctive. Remember that you're going to have to change the verbs in both clauses, right? You're going to have to change those tenses. To keep it simple, in the first clause, the main verb, change that into the imperfect rather than the preterite, just for consistency, okay? Now, once I've written down all the examples, go ahead and pause the video, do your conversions, and then don't restart it until you're ready to check your work, all right? Okay, here come those examples. All right, these are the sentences that I have, and I want to see if you can convert from present subjunctive situations to past or imperfect subjunctive. The first one reads, Juan quiere que María conteste el teléfono. Juan quiere que María conteste el teléfono. The verb here is contestar, contestar. Number 2 is, los estudiantes le piden al profesor que explique la gramática. The verb here is explicar, explicar, an AR verb. Number 3, no es posible que mis padres sepan la verdad. The verb here, sepan, comes from the infinitive saber. Okay, saber. 4, Javier fears teme que su amiga repruebe el examen. The verb here is reprobar, reprobar. Okay, reprobar. To fail, like to fail an exam. Reprobar. Okay. Javier teme que su amiga repruebe el examen. Number 5 reads, me sorprende que esto sea tan fácil. Again, sea is the subjunctive of ser. Me sorprende que esto sea tan fácil. I'm surprised that this is so easy. So, take these 5. Remember the instructions. You need to convert the verb in the main clause, quiere, piden, es, teme, sorprende. That verb needs to be converted into the imperfect, okay? Into the imperfect, and then use the past subjunctive for the dependent clause verbs here. All right, give you a few minutes to work on that. Pause the video. Don't restart it until you're ready to see the answers, okay? Okay, if you're watching this, that means that you've done the conversions and you're ready to look at the answers, right? Okay, here come those answers then. Okay, so you're ready to go over the answers. Let's take a look one by one at how we're going to convert these into past tense situations. We're going to take here in number 1, the verb in the main clause, quiere, and I said use the imperfect, so that would be Juan quería que María, this is going to become contestara, que María contestara el teléfono. Here where we have los estudiantes le piden. Now again, this could be imperfect or preterite, but I said just for consistency, let's use the imperfect. So it'd be pedían, verb is pedir, pedían. Los estudiantes le pedían al profesor que, instead of explique, we're going to change that to, it's an AR verb, explicaron, take off the on, okay, explicara, okay, que explicara, explicara. Number 3, instead of no es posible, we're going to change that, like I said, to the imperfect, but it could be preterite. No fue posible, no era. My R's aren't turning out very well. No era posible que mis padres. Now, saber is a little bit tricky. It's totally irregular. Okay, the stem in the third person that we're going to get from the third person preterite to the plural, supieron. So, mis padres supieran. No era posible que mis padres supieran la verdad. Again, that one is subjunctive because this idea, no era posible or no es posible, communicates denial, uncertainty, doubt, that type of an idea. Here we have Javier teme que su amiga repruebe el examen. Instead of he fears, we put it in he feared or he used to fear. So it's going to become temía, was afraid that, temía que su amiga. Remember the verb is reprobar. Third person plural is going to be, third person plural, the predicate is going to be reprobaron. So, talking about su amiga, reprobara. I'm going to stress that second to last syllable. Reprobara. Javier temía que su amiga reprobara el examen. Okay? How we doing so far? Moving on to number 5. We're going to take sorprender, put that one, the main clause verb, in the imperfect, like I said. Sorprendía. It could be preterite, sorprendió. Me sorprendía que esto, instead of sea, I'm going to take ser, which is going to give us fueron in the third person preterite of the plural. Fueron, que esto fuera, since our subject of the dependent clause here is this sort of neuter, right? Esto fuera tan fácil. So we have contestara, explicara, supieran, reprobara, y fuera as our answers. Okay, so how'd you do? I'm sure you did just fine. If not, you can always rewind and review. It's kind of a tricky topic, I know. But this does conclude my lesson on the past or the imperfect subjunctive in Spanish. I hope that you found it to be helpful. I tried to make it as clear as possible, okay? As always, I welcome your questions, comments, and suggestions, so please do leave me a comment and let me know what you thought about this lesson. Don't forget, you can find me online at www.professorjason.com. I also have a Facebook community, okay? Just log on to Facebook and search for Professor Jason Spanish and Portuguese. And also you can find me if you want to follow me on Twitter at Professor_Jason, okay? So, until next time, thanks a lot for watching. Hasta pronto. Ciao.